Okay, I think that Stan already made a very nice presentation on the kind of intellectual aspect of how you can dive into your thesis, and also when I saw the setup, basically that Stan will talk first, and then and we have two people talking, so I don't want to necessarily repeat what he's saying, but more maybe add on certain things that are related to maybe practical aspects of how you can relatively fast find good information for your topic, especially if it's not, because before we talked very much about the architectural discourse, and which I find for an architecture thesis is very important. But I think that many of you, as we have seen in Cambridge, that somebody does a thesis in architecture but related to food or to some other issues. So it's often kind of architecture end, right? And then you have to bring it back into your discipline, into architecture, but often you get the new innovation part might be also related to certain kind of social issues, to urban issues, food issues, to many other aspects as well. And then it's a question like how in a relatively short time you can make a very academic research on this to avoid that you talk about something on a relatively shallow way, which I think on the master level is just not acceptable, or very easily makes you attackable by other disciplines also, right? I find it quite interesting when Francesco and I were working with capstone project students from urban studies, for example. You know, we have this urban studies program jointly from GRM and architecture together. And in the fourth year of the bachelor, they have to do a 1-year capstone project or capstone thesis, either text-based or project-based. But there are some of them that use this to do a project which is actually very much comparable to our MArch study. And in the first term, they also have to do a lot of background research. And I don't know if maybe Francesco already showed one of them to you in another course, but I was quite impressed by the level how they do research and how they structure a report. And I find, although of course you can say, well, we are architects, we don't have to mess up with all those things, we don't need to make a proper referencing and so on. Well, I think as soon as you go out of this building, or you will be confronted basically with this kind of reality. And people are used to see a quality of work on a master level like this. And so I think it's good to, first of all, realize that, and on the other hand, to see like how can you get there. For example, if we take, this was work by Nick Yao, a student that we had in the Urban Studies program, who worked, as usual, as you know, we worked as with some of you. He also worked on Signpoon, and for example, he was interested on walkability, and particularly, for example, for universal access. So how, for example, if you see an aging community, you want to have people, on one hand, you have to plan for people that are elderly, might be in wheelchairs and so on. On the other hand, you want to have young people maybe getting into those districts. They might need to use strollers and so on. And so he did a lot of research on this, and then later came with a certain kind of design strategies. Now this is a level of work of a bachelor student. So you are supposed to be master, you worked in practice and 2 years and had already the M1. Just want to show you how a work like this is structured. It starts with a synopsis, a very clear kind of content sheet, list of figures, so just, I think also the formalities of those things, I think they are, I think, relatively important. Clear kind of introduction. Now he used his own kind of graphic style. He doesn't come from architecture, no, but has some kind of drawings. And then he would basically make a research on, for example, key concepts. Now, let's say keywords, key concepts to see like, okay, if we talk about public space, if we talk about universal access and so on, these are terms that have certain kind of definitions. Now we heard already from Stan that actually the architecture discourse is not only about maybe a definition of a term, but it might be also the use of that particular term in an architecture discourse. We are even one level maybe higher, but I think usually you would think for research work also a certain kind of idea how you define the term, how you use the term, and what was done in terms of research related to this term is quite useful, and it gives you a certain kind of credibility to talk with other people. So basically, for example, if you use the term walkability, it is something that he would kind of research, search for a number of academic papers, and then basically come to certain kind of definitions that basically allow him to talk about those particular topics in a way that, let's say, if you would talk with professionals or other academics, they would see, well, okay, he knows what he's talking about. Similarly, for example, universal design, which I think is quite an important concept for architecture also. He looked at the different kind of concepts of universal design on a building scale, but because he worked on an urban scale, he was quite interested, is there anything of that that is basically also applicable in an urban scale that we can talk about how, for example, people with wheelchairs and so on can get somewhere. And there are various, from various studies in different countries, basically he investigated a literature review. He would have basically a literature review and then see, okay, how each of those terms is used, how are, for example, different different parameters. At some point here, he comes, for example, at 5 different ways of universal access is kind of addressed in design guidelines, and you would go through all of that. Now, this is maybe a little bit different graphic as you use it in architecture, but I think it's very clear. Then he would do basically case studies that would basically see, because for example, I think in the public housing there are certain kind of approaches to basically, on the urban scale, for example, use universal access to see like how they implement this. So you would just find a lot of very well-researched information. And then from there on, then he made his own experiments. I think I discussed this, I think in the last studio, also with some of the students. For example, he, in addition to a literature review, that he was thinking, okay, how can I get first-hand information about how, for example, the walkability is in this area. So he made various runs with basically putting a friend into a wheelchair using a video camera with GPS tracking, and basically tour through the whole neighborhood to basically identify the problematic areas. And based on the findings in these kind of video tracking and so on, sorry, this file is very big. It stops somewhere. Sorry. I have to wait for a moment. Then developed his design strategy. No? Now, maybe I don't need to show you too much more of this, but I find, oh yeah, and then at the end, of course, there is a clear kind of literature review, there's an appendix, and all those kind of forms that basically show that you're doing actually a rigorous piece of research. And I think in other places, you can say, well, this is maybe urban studies. If you look at, for example, this was another work that I consulted a student also from Portugal, for example, writing on Macau and came to meet you as a second advisor. This is, for example, a thesis in architecture in Portugal, and you would see the same kind of rigor in terms of making a research work in terms of the different literature, the different kind of planning stages, all those kind of things basically well studied and documented. And I find, even though there are probably more creative ways of presenting something and so on, that of course people outside of architecture would basically expect this kind of rigor in a work, maybe of a research work of a first term, as a master thesis. Now, I think, of course, we can work differently, and maybe we have a stronger design component in our, also in the first term, I think. But nevertheless, I find it quite interesting that somebody on the bachelor level can do this kind of work, whereas often I encounter with my MArch students on the thesis level that they don't know really the term, they talk very, very, let's say, they might be great student maybe for design, but if you talk about with them about a certain kind of concepts or general knowledge, it can be relatively thin. And I think it's just kind of sad, because I feel like on the other end, if you have great design skills, you shouldn't be like this, it should be more rounded, right? Maybe it's because, for example, in urban studies, right from the first course with MeCam, they just have to read and series, and basically they cannot get away without any no references and so on. And then by the time they're bachelor, I think they just do it, right? Okay, now, but I don't want to kind of continue with this kind of complaining approach. I just want to maybe use some minutes to help you maybe how in a very short time you can find good information about different topics if it's not, for example, necessarily your main field, because if you with your thesis, you are often kind of going into new areas, which is also very good, right? You want to learn something new about new aspects. So how can you relatively fast go to the best information that you somehow can get? And now, how many of you use the e-resources of our library website? Do you know that we have those different e-resources, e-journals? Are you using that a lot? Or you usually search for, because usually what most students in architecture do, you search for a book of a monography on a famous architect, right? You just go to library search, and then you go, Reb Kohler's new book, or Sejima's new book. Okay. Now, our university pays actually probably millions of Hong Kong dollars to subscribe for academic journals. And what's amazing is when you do search through the e-resource functions with the library, you can directly get fantastic information, and you directly can download the PDF. Right? Because the university pays so much money for it that you basically can have this amazing access to information. Only that in architecture, for whatever reason, I think usually students are reluctant to do this, or because we are usually looking at drawing, maybe people think you don't have to do it. Anyway, for those people that know that already, I think what I show you now is very practical. It's not very, it doesn't go very deep, and it will be very fast. But I think I would just want to show you those kind of very small tricks, because I realized that I think probably, have you clicked this button ever? This kind of e-resources? Some of you, yes, no? But not all, maybe, right? Now you can search over various various ways. For example, by let's say, of course, by journals. Let me see if it works. No, so I guess many of you, of course, use the internet also, and the internet is, I think, fantastic to find things. But the problem is if you hit, for example, a particular academic journal, if you would go, maybe let's say Google, and maybe I write maybe urban village Shenzhen or something like this, right? Maybe you would also relatively fast find that there are certain kind of academic papers here. What's this here? Something like this. This sounds kind of interesting. For example, something like this, right? So this is say journals. These are academic peer-reviewed journals. Somebody wrote about land use diversity in urban villages, just as an example, right? Now, usually, if you and then here you see even articles citing this article. You see even there are many other additional articles that also are related to the topic of urban village, right? Because if usually in M2, if somebody writes, for example, on does a design project on Shenzhen urban village, even after 3-4 weeks, maybe has read maybe one text about it, but there might be a whole library on this kind of particular topic. Now, usually what happens here is we can try to go directly to full text. Let's see what it is doing. So maybe we are actually very happy that this is an open access journal, then we are very happy. But in most cases, for those academic articles, oh, here you are actually very, maybe you are here already with Google, you can find perfectly an article.
We are in some way
maybe you're
having journal in our school, so it's
because usually what usually would happen exactly when I click on full paper would be basically you have to have a subscription to that journal, and or you pay basically 30, let's say maybe 100 Hong Kong dollar or 200 Hong Kong dollar just to read one article, right? Now the good thing is with our university that basically immediately you can download those texts, right, as a PDF, and basically after probably one Sunday of work, you have a stack of peer-reviewed articles of probably this size that are very specific for your topic. You know? And then, of course, the way how you would kind of continue to work is then, because maybe the first article you're searching for might be just a kind of by luck you do any search first, but then of course you can, the most important part for us is usually as researchers is on one hand maybe to read the abstract and the text if it's really related to our topic, but the next step will be to look basically here, right? That's basically what students always find really annoying to do, basically basically the references at the end. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. Where it went. But in these references, of course, often there's the best paper you want to still find is actually there in the references. No? So basically, you can become more and more precise, and in a very short time, you might have something that to whatever topic, if it's kind of food, society, architecture, construction, might really give you much better information than just basically a Wikipedia page and so on. No? So I think this is basically all possible, and of course, it might be good to first start with the internet because it has basically the broadest range. But then from there, you might very quickly maybe see, oh, there are particular journals maybe, or a particular fields where those topics are discussed, and then you go basically to e-journals, for example, and then you know already, oh, this journal, for example, is there, but I didn't have access to it because of copyrights and so on, and then you put it basically here into the system of e-journals of our university, and you will see that probably, I don't know, 80% chance you find the journals. No? So, and that means that with basically almost here within the time of this kind of session of half an hour, I could probably produce or download 10, if not more, very specific academic papers for your particular field. No? Now this is e-journals. This is one of the sources you have. There are other ones. That's, for example, by dissertation. For example, you can go through dissertations. Now these ones are the COHK collection of dissertations. Then also, let's see, by type here, sorry, before I did. You can also go by type, because the other one were only dissertations in Hong Kong, no? So they're already quite a lot. No? But for example here, if you go by type, there's another very nice source where you can find amazing information. Is basically dissertations, right? And you see different databases. No? Now you have, for example, a databases of all theses and dissertations in UK from 1700 to present here, right? Now you could say, well, UK, well, my topic is in Hong Kong, or why should I bother? But actually, of course, with these universities like Cambridge and so on, many of those universities, they have probably in particular programs, let's say in urban design, 80% of the students are from China, right? So I think many of their works might be related to Hong Kong and very similar topics that you're working on. For example, whatever, vertical farming or those kind of typical thesis projects that we had maybe in the last 10 years. There might be entire, or I'm 100% sure there are entire dissertations that you can find and also download directly. Now, the point is, of course, if you are happy and you find this even from a very good university and is a very good student, even better. But even if it is, let's say, a kind of not so great student, if you can find a dissertation that is somehow completed, still even a relatively bad written dissertation might be a fantastic treasure for research, because that person basically, for a dissertation, did 1 year of research of literature for that particular topic, and probably because it is maybe from the last year, so basically from all the last books that were written on that particular topic, probably went through all that, right? So that means in 2 days, probably, you can find a whole kind of package of material that is all kind of very, what can I say, is academically researched, and from there again, many new threads go in further directions. So the more you also know what your particular interest is, the more, of course, the more precise you can kind of follow up on those studies, right? Because maybe you see, by chance, maybe even the dissertation wasn't really exactly on what you were interested in. There are probably also architecture thesis, because it's dissertation and thesis, architecture thesis, of course, also. But I'm now talking a little bit more also about interdisciplinary work that might influence your architecture thesis, right? So I think those are just some of you already work with those kind of sources, but if you don't,